In a small town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a pace that seemed almost forgotten by the rest of the world. The streets were lined with quaint shops, family-owned businesses, and homes that had stood for generations. It was a place where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. But beneath its idyllic surface, the town carried scars of division, some old and faded, others fresh and raw. Among these divisions was an undercurrent of racial tension that occasionally bubbled to the surface, though most people preferred to ignore it rather than confront it head-on. This uneasy balance was about to be shattered one ordinary afternoon when an incident unfolded that would leave no one untouched. It all began with Officer Greg Thompson, a man in his early 30s, who had recently transferred to the local police department from a larger city. Greg was known for his brash attitude and overzealous approach to law enforcement, traits that had earned him both praise and criticism in equal measure. He prided himself on being tough and unyielding, often believing that strictness was the only way to maintain order. However, what many didn't realize was that Greg's methods were heavily influenced by deep-seated prejudices he rarely acknowledged even to himself. These biases weren't always obvious, but they colored how he interacted with certain members of the community, particularly those who didn't look like him or share his background. His arrival in the town had initially gone unnoticed, but it wouldn't take long for his presence to make waves. On this particular day, Greg was patrolling the outskirts of town, an area known for its mix of residential neighborhoods and commercial spaces. The weather was warm, and the streets were alive with activity. Children playing on sidewalks, shopkeepers arranging their displays, and cars moving steadily along the main road. As Greg drove past a busy intersection, something caught his eye. A woman stood next to a parked car, leaning over the open hood as if inspecting something underneath. She appeared to be in her late 40s, dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. To anyone else, she might have seemed like just another resident dealing with car trouble. But to Greg, her appearance triggered a series of assumptions that clouded his judgment. The woman was black, and in Greg's mind, that fact alone made her stand out in this predominantly white neighborhood. Without giving it much thought, he pulled his patrol car to the curb and stepped out, his demeanor already defensive. Approaching her with long strides, he called out, "What's going on here?" His tone was sharp, almost accusatory, as though he expected her to justify her presence. The woman glanced up briefly before returning her attention to whatever she was doing under the hood. "My car broke down," she replied calmly, her voice steady and measured. "I'm trying to figure out what's wrong." Her response should have been enough to satisfy any reasonable person, but Greg wasn't satisfied. Instead of offering assistance, he pressed further, asking questions that bordered on intrusive. "Do you live around here? Is this your car? What are you doing in this part of town?" Each question carried a hint of suspicion, as if her mere existence in that space required explanation. The woman paused what she was doing and turned to face him fully. There was no fear in her expression, only a quiet resolve that seemed to unsettle Greg even more. "Yes, I live nearby," she said evenly. "And yes, this is my car. Does that answer your questions, officer?" Her words dripped with polite sarcasm, though Greg missed the subtlety entirely. To him, her confidence felt like defiance, and it fueled his growing irritation. He took a step closer, his posture rigid, his voice rising slightly. "You need to show me some ID," he demanded, ignoring the fact that she hadn't done anything wrong. At this point, a small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some watched silently while others exchanged murmurs of disapproval at Greg's behavior. As the tension escalated, the woman remained composed, refusing to let Greg's aggression rattle her. "Officer," she said firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching, "I haven't broken any laws. You have no reason to demand my identification." Her calmness only infuriated Greg further. He leaned in closer, his face reddening as he snapped, "Beck, don't tell me how to do my job. If you've got nothing to hide, then proving who you are shouldn't be a problem." His words carried a venomous undertone, laced with prejudice that he couldn't or wouldn't conceal. By now, the crowd had grown larger, and several people were recording the exchange on their phones. Someone shouted, "Leave her alone!" But Greg ignored them, too focused on asserting his authority, or so he thought. Unbeknownst to Greg, the woman he was confronting was none other than Chief Andrea Hayes, the newly appointed head of the police department. Andrea had spent years climbing the ranks in law enforcement, overcoming countless obstacles along the way. She was a trailblazer, not just because she was black, but also because she embodied everything a leader should be: fair, compassionate, and unwavering in her commitment to justice. Her appointment as chief had been met with enthusiasm by many in the community, though there were undoubtedly some within the department who resented her rise to power. Unfortunately for Greg, he hadn't yet been properly introduced to Andrea. Having skipped the orientation session where new officers were briefed on key figures in the department, this oversight would soon prove disastrous. Andrea recognized Greg immediately, not personally but professionally. She had heard whispers about his reputation, and wasn't surprised to find herself on the receiving end of his misplaced aggression. Still, she decided to let the situation play out, curious to see how far he would go before realizing his mistake. When Greg continued to escalate the confrontation, Andrea reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge, holding it up deliberately so that the sunlight caught its metallic surface. For a moment, Greg stared at it blankly, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. Then, as comprehension dawned, his expression shifted from anger to shock, and finally, to sheer panic. The murmurs around them grew louder as people realized who the woman was. "That's the police chief," someone exclaimed, and the news spread like wildfire through the crowd. Greg stumbled backward, his face turning pale as he fumbled for words. "Chief Hayes, I didn't know. It's not what it looks like," he stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating completely. Andrea regarded him coolly, her expression unreadable. Without saying a word, she gestured for him to follow her, to her car. Once inside, she turned to face him, her voice low but commanding. "We're going back to the station," she said simply. "This isn't over." As they drove away, the crowd dispersed, buzzing with speculation about what had just transpired. By the time they reached the precinct, the story had already spread throughout the department. Officers whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others casting nervous glances toward Andrea's office. Word quickly traveled beyond the walls of the police station, reaching residents and local media outlets alike. Social media lit up with posts about the incident, some praising Andrea for standing her ground, others criticizing Greg for his blatant display of racism. The town found itself divided once again, forced to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and accountability. Meanwhile, Andrea wasted no time addressing the matter directly. She called Greg into her office, closing the door behind them to ensure privacy. Sitting across from him, she spoke candidly about the impact of his actions, not just on her personally, but on the community as a whole. She emphasized the importance of trust between law enforcement and citizens, explaining how moments like these eroded that trust irreparably. Her tone was firm but not vindictive. She wanted Greg to understand the gravity of his behavior rather than simply punish him. Over the course of their conversation, Greg listened intently, his initial defensiveness giving way to genuine remorse. He admitted that he had allowed his biases to cloud his judgment, vowing to do better moving forward. Andrea believed him, or at least hoped he meant what he said, and outlined a plan to help him grow. She assigned him to mandatory sensitivity training and paired him with a seasoned mentor who could guide him through the process of self-reflection and change. Over time, Greg began to confront his own prejudices, learning to see individuals for who they truly were, rather than relying on harmful stereotypes. While progress was slow, it was undeniable, and Andrea kept a close watch on his development, ensuring that he stayed true to his promises. The ripple effects of the incident extended far beyond Greg's personal journey. Andrea used the event as a catalyst for broader change within the department, implementing new policies aimed at promoting inclusivity and mutual respect. She held town hall meetings to engage with the community, listening to their concerns and working collaboratively to rebuild trust. Though challenges remained, the town began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. People started talking openly about race and privilege, topics that had long been avoided. Slowly but surely, the incident became a turning point, a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there is always room for growth and transformation. And for Andrea, it reinforced her belief that leadership isn't just about enforcing rules, it's about inspiring change. The ripple effects of the confrontation between Andrea and Greg began to spread far beyond the confines of the police station, touching every corner of the town in ways no one could have anticipated. News of the incident traveled quickly, thanks, in part to social media, but also because people simply couldn't stop talking about it. By the next morning, the story had become the center of conversation at breakfast tables, coffee shops, and school drop-offs. Some residents were outraged by Greg's behavior, while others defended him, arguing that he was just doing his job. The divide ran deep, exposing fault lines that had long existed beneath the surface of the seemingly peaceful community. For many Black residents, the incident was a painful reminder of the discrimination they faced daily, often dismissed or ignored by those in positions of power. Meanwhile, some white residents struggled to reconcile their image of the town as a safe and welcoming place with the reality of what had happened. Andrea knew that addressing the fallout wouldn't be easy, but she also recognized the opportunity it presented. This was a moment to confront systemic issues head-on, rather than sweeping them under the rug as had been done so many times before. She called an emergency meeting with her senior staff, laying out a plan to tackle the situation with transparency and accountability. Her first step was to issue a public statement acknowledging the incident and reaffirming the department's commitment to serving all members of the community equally. "Mistakes were made," she said during a press conference held later that week, "and we are taking immediate action to ensure they are not repeated." Her words were met with mixed reactions. Some praised her for her leadership, while others accused her of being too lenient on Greg. But Andrea remained steadfast, knowing that real change required patience and persistence. In the days that followed, Andrea turned her attention to Greg, determined to help him understand the gravity of his actions. While she had already spoken to him privately, she believed that meaningful transformation would require more than a single conversation. She assigned him to a rigorous sensitivity training program designed to challenge ingrained biases and foster empathy. The program included workshops, role-playing exercises, and discussions led by experts in diversity and inclusion. At first, Greg approached these sessions begrudgingly, convinced that he didn't need them. But as the weeks went on, something shifted inside him. One particularly powerful exercise involved officers pairing up with community members from different backgrounds to hear their stories firsthand. Greg was paired with a middle-aged Black man named Marcus, who shared how years of racial profiling had left him distrustful of law enforcement. Listening to Marcus's experiences opened Greg's eyes in ways he hadn't expected, forcing him to confront the harm caused by attitudes like his own. While Greg worked on changing himself, Andrea focused on implementing broader reforms within the department. She introduced mandatory cultural competency training for all officers regardless of rank or experience. She also established a citizen advisory board tasked with reviewing complaints against the police and providing recommendations for improvement. These measures weren't universally popular. Some officers grumbled about feeling targeted, while others questioned whether such initiatives would actually make a difference. But Andrea refused to back down, reminding everyone that building trust took time and effort. She encouraged open dialogue, inviting both officers and community members to share their thoughts and concerns. Slowly but surely, these conversations began to bridge gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. Outside the police department, the town continued to grapple with the aftermath of the incident. Local activists organized rallies and forums to discuss issues of race and policing, drawing large crowds eager to participate in the conversation. One event, titled Justice for All, brought together speakers from various walks of life, teachers, business owners, students, and clergy, who shared personal stories of discrimination and resilience. Andrea attended several of these gatherings, listening intently and taking notes. She understood that true progress required collaboration, and she was committed to working alongside the community to create lasting solutions. Her presence at these events sent a powerful message. She wasn't just a figurehead but an active participant in the fight for equality. Despite these efforts, resistance lingered in certain quarters. A small but vocal group of residents opposed Andrea's reforms, claiming they undermined the authority of the police. They argued that officers needed to maintain control, even if that meant bending rules occasionally. Their arguments gained traction online, where anonymous posts fueled anger and misinformation. Tensions reached a boiling point when someone spray-painted derogatory messages on the side of the police station, targeting Andrea specifically. The vandalism shocked the town, prompting calls for unity and healing. Andrea responded with characteristic grace, condemning the act but refusing to let it derail her mission. Instead, she used it as an opportunity to emphasize the importance of standing together against hate. As weeks turned into months, signs of progress began to emerge. Officers reported feeling more connected to the community, thanks in part to new initiatives like neighborhood patrols and youth mentorship programs. Residents, too, expressed cautious optimism, noting improvements in how they were treated by law enforcement. Even Greg, once a symbol of everything wrong with the system, became an unlikely advocate for change. He volunteered to lead discussions on bias awareness, sharing his journey with fellow officers in hopes of inspiring them to reflect on their own behaviors. His transformation wasn't perfect. There were still moments of defensiveness and doubt, but it was undeniable. Those who had written him off as irredeemable found themselves surprised by his willingness to grow. Andrea's leadership played a crucial role in driving these changes, but she never claimed sole credit. Instead, she highlighted the collective effort of everyone involved, from the officers undergoing training to the citizens demanding accountability. She often reminded people that progress wasn't linear. There would be setbacks along the way, but each step forward mattered. Her humility earned her widespread respect, even from those who had initially doubted her abilities. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Andrea sat alone in her office, reflecting on how far they'd come. She thought about the countless hours spent navigating difficult conversations, the sleepless nights worrying about the future, and the moments of doubt when she wondered if her efforts were making any difference at all. But then she remembered the faces of those she had helped, the young boy who smiled brightly after meeting an officer at a community event, the elderly woman who thanked her for finally listening, the colleagues who admitted they saw things differently now, and she knew it was worth it. The town itself began to feel different too. Conversations about race and privilege, once avoided or brushed aside, became commonplace. Schools incorporated lessons on diversity into their curriculums. Businesses pledged to support minority-owned enterprises, and local leaders prioritized inclusivity in decision-making processes. It wasn't a utopia by any means. Prejudices still existed and tensions occasionally flared, but the atmosphere had shifted. People were more willing to listen, to learn, and to work toward a better future. Andrea took pride in seeing these changes unfold, knowing that her actions, however imperfect, had sparked something meaningful. One afternoon, as Andrea walked through the park near the center of town, she noticed a familiar face sitting on a bench. It was Greg, watching children play soccer on the field. He stood up as she approached, offering a respectful nod. "Chief Hayes," he said, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. Andrea smiled warmly, gesturing for him to sit back down. They talked for a while, discussing recent developments and sharing thoughts on where to go from here. Greg admitted that he still had a lot to learn, but expressed gratitude for Andrea's guidance. "You didn't give up on me," he said quietly, his words heavy with sincerity. Andrea nodded, replying simply, "Because I believe in second chances, for everyone." Their conversation ended on a hopeful note, leaving Andrea with a renewed sense of purpose. As she continued her walk, she thought about the road ahead. There would always be challenges, disagreements, and moments of uncertainty. But if this town could come together to address its flaws and strive for something better, then perhaps anything was possible. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the streets she had sworn to protect. Andrea felt a quiet confidence settle over her. Change was hard, messy, and often uncomfortable, but it was also beautiful, transformative, and necessary. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that brighter days lay ahead. As the weeks turned into months, Andrea's efforts to reform the police department and mend ties with the community began to bear fruit, though progress remained uneven and fragile. The town was still grappling with the aftermath of Greg's actions, and while some residents praised Andrea for her leadership, others continued to question whether real change was possible. Skeptics argued that one incident couldn't undo decades of systemic bias, while supporters insisted that every step forward mattered. Amidst this tension, Andrea found herself at the center of a delicate balancing act, navigating the expectations of both her officers and the community, all while staying true to her vision of justice and equality. One of the biggest challenges Andrea faced was rebuilding trust with Black residents, many of whom had grown weary of empty promises from law enforcement. For years, they had felt marginalized and dismissed, their concerns brushed aside or met with indifference. Andrea understood that words alone wouldn't be enough to convince them that things were different now. She needed action, and not just symbolic gestures, but meaningful policies that addressed their lived experiences. To that end, she launched a series of town hall meetings specifically designed to give residents a platform to voice their grievances. These gatherings were held in neighborhoods across the town, ensuring accessibility for everyone. At each meeting, Andrea listened intently, taking notes and asking follow-up questions to show she genuinely cared about what people had to say. The feedback she received was raw and unfiltered, ranging from complaints about racial profiling during traffic stops to stories of feeling unsafe around certain officers. Some attendees recounted painful memories of loved ones who had been mistreated by the police, their voices trembling with emotion. Others expressed frustration over the lack of diversity within the department itself, pointing out that representation mattered as much as policy changes. Andrea didn't shy away from these criticisms. Instead, she embraced them as opportunities to learn and grow. After each meeting, she compiled the feedback into detailed reports, which she shared with her senior staff. Together, they brainstormed solutions, prioritizing initiatives that directly addressed the concerns raised by residents. One such initiative was the creation of a civilian oversight committee, tasked with reviewing complaints against officers and holding them accountable for misconduct. The committee consisted of a diverse group of volunteers, including educators, social workers, and local business owners, all of whom brought unique perspectives to the table. Andrea worked closely with the committee to establish clear guidelines for how investigations would be conducted, ensuring transparency and fairness throughout the process. While some officers initially resisted the idea, fearing it would undermine their authority, Andrea reassured them that accountability wasn't about punishment. It was about building trust. Over time, even the most skeptical among them began to see the value in having an independent body to review cases objectively. Another key focus for Andrea was improving diversity within the department. She knew that hiring practices needed to change if the force was going to reflect the community it served. With this in mind, she partnered with local schools and colleges to create outreach programs aimed at recruiting young people from underrepresented backgrounds. These programs included career fairs, mentorship opportunities, and internships designed to expose students to the realities of law enforcement. Andrea also implemented implicit bias training for hiring managers, recognizing that unconscious prejudices could influence recruitment decisions. Her goal was simple yet ambitious: to build a department where everyone felt welcome and valued, regardless of their race, gender, or background. While Andrea tackled these structural issues, she also made a conscious effort to foster personal connections between officers and residents. She believed that trust couldn't be built through policies alone. It required human interaction, moments of vulnerability, and understanding. To facilitate this, she organized regular community connect events, where officers spent time engaging with residents in informal settings. These events ranged from barbecues and block parties to basketball games and art workshops. Officers were encouraged to participate fully, leaving their uniforms behind to interact as equals. At first, some residents were hesitant, wary of forming bonds with those they viewed as adversaries. But as the events became more frequent, barriers began to break down. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter filled the air, and friendships started to form. Greg, too, attended several of these events, often finding himself paired with Andrea as part of a team-building exercise. Initially, he felt out of place, unsure of how to engage with people he had once judged harshly. But Andrea guided him gently, modeling the kind of behavior she hoped to see from him. She introduced him to residents, sharing anecdotes about his journey toward self-awareness, and encouraging them to give him a chance. Slowly but surely, Greg began to relax, allowing himself to connect with others on a deeper level.
One memorable moment came during a community painting project, where participants worked together to create a mural celebrating diversity. Greg stood shoulder to shoulder with Marcus, the man he had met during sensitivity training, as they painted.
Side by side. Their conversation was light-hearted at first, but eventually, they delved into heavier topics, discussing everything from childhood dreams to fears about the future. By the end of the day, Greg realized he had gained not just a friend, but a mentor. Despite these successes, Andrea knew that resistance still lingered in certain corners of the town. A small but vocal group of residents continued to oppose her reforms, arguing that they undermined the effectiveness of law enforcement. They organized protests outside the police station, holding signs that read "Back the Blue," and demanding that officers be given more freedom to enforce the law without interference. Online forums buzzed with heated debates, with some users accusing Andrea of being soft on crime and others defending her as a beacon of hope. The negativity weighed heavily on Andrea, especially when it spilled over into her personal life. Anonymous letters arrived at her home, criticizing her decisions and questioning her motives. Friends advised her to ignore the backlash, but Andrea couldn't help but feel the sting of rejection. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. If anything, the opposition only strengthened her resolve to push forward. In addition to external pressures, Andrea faced internal challenges as well. Not all officers welcomed the changes she was implementing, and some openly resented her for rocking the boat. Morale dipped in certain parts of the department, with rumors spreading that Andrea was trying to dismantle traditions that had defined the force for generations. To address these concerns, Andrea held regular one-on-one meetings with her officers, inviting them to share their thoughts and frustrations. She listened patiently, acknowledging their fears while gently reminding them of the bigger picture. "Change is hard," she told them during one particularly tense session. "But we can't keep doing things the same way and expect different results. We owe it to ourselves and to the community to try something new." Her words resonated with many, though not everyone was convinced immediately. Some officers clung to old habits, resisting efforts to modernize procedures or adopt new technologies. Others struggled with the emotional toll of confronting their own biases, finding it difficult to reconcile their past actions with their present aspirations. Andrea recognized that transformation wouldn't happen overnight, so she focused on creating an environment where growth was celebrated rather than feared. She instituted a peer support program, pairing officers who were further along in their journeys with those who were just beginning theirs. The program proved invaluable, providing a safe space for honest dialogue and mutual encouragement. Amidst all the challenges, there were moments of triumph that reminded Andrea why she had chosen this path. One such moment came when a young boy named Jamal approached her after a community event, clutching a drawing he had made of her. In the picture, Andrea stood tall in her uniform, surrounded by smiling faces of all colors. "You're my hero," Jamal said shyly, handing her the artwork. Tears welled up in Andrea's eyes as she knelt down to thank him, promising to frame the drawing and keep it in her office as a reminder of why her work mattered. Another heartwarming moment occurred when a local pastor invited her to speak at his church, praising her for her courage and dedication. As she addressed the congregation, Andrea felt a profound sense of connection, knowing that her efforts were making a difference, not just in policies, but in people's lives. By the end of the year, the town had undergone a remarkable transformation. While tensions still flared occasionally, the overall atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Residents reported feeling safer and more respected by officers, while officers expressed greater satisfaction in their roles. Crime rates had decreased slightly, thanks in part to improved community relations, and surveys showed a significant uptick in public trust in the police department. Andrea took pride in these achievements, though she never claimed sole credit. Instead, she highlighted the collective effort of everyone involved, from the officers embracing reform to the citizens advocating for change. As the months passed, Andrea's efforts to reform the police department and foster unity in the town gained momentum, but not without resistance. The changes she implemented were met with a mix of hope, skepticism, and outright hostility. Some officers embraced the new initiatives, seeing them as an opportunity to rebuild trust with the community. Others, however, resented what they perceived as unnecessary interference in their work. Among this latter group was Officer Ryan Miller, a veteran cop who had spent 2 decades on the force. Ryan prided himself on his experience and believed that policing was best left unchanged. To him, Andrea's reforms felt like an attack on everything he stood for. He often muttered under his breath about political correctness during meetings and made sarcastic comments whenever sensitivity training was mentioned. His attitude created tension within the department, dividing officers into those who supported Andrea's vision and those who clung to the old ways. Andrea was aware of the growing rift, but she refused to let it derail her mission. Instead, she decided to address the issue head-on by organizing a series of team-building exercises designed to break down barriers and encourage collaboration. One such exercise involved pairing officers with unlikely partners, those they rarely worked with or even spoke to, and assigning them tasks that required mutual trust and communication. Ryan found himself paired with Detective Lisa Carter, a younger officer known for her progressive views and dedication to community policing. At first, their interactions were strained, marked by awkward silences and thinly veiled disdain. But as they worked together on a mock scenario involving de-escalation techniques, something shifted. Lisa's calm demeanor and practical approach began to soften Ryan's rigid stance, while his years of experience offered valuable insights that Lisa hadn't considered. By the end of the exercise, they were exchanging ideas freely, their initial animosity replaced by a grudging respect. The ripple effects of these exercises extended beyond individual relationships, fostering a sense of camaraderie within the department. Officers who had once viewed each other with suspicion began to see one another as allies rather than adversaries. This newfound unity translated into better teamwork on the streets, where officers now approached situations with a more collaborative mindset. For example, when a domestic dispute escalated into a potentially dangerous confrontation, a diverse team of officers responded swiftly, using the skills they had learned in training to defuse the situation without resorting to violence. The outcome was hailed as a success not just by the department but by the community as well. Residents who had previously avoided contact with law enforcement started reaching out, expressing gratitude for the noticeable shift in how officers conducted themselves. Despite these positive developments, challenges persisted. A segment of the town remained resistant to change, particularly among older generations who clung to outdated beliefs. These individuals formed informal groups, meeting at local diners or community centers to voice their grievances. They argued that Andrea's reforms were eroding the authority of the police and creating a culture of entitlement. Their rhetoric grew increasingly divisive, fueling resentment and mistrust. One evening, tensions boiled over when a heated debate erupted at a town hall meeting. A man in his 60s stood up, pointing a finger at Andrea and accusing her of favoring certain groups over others. "You're turning our police force into a joke," he shouted, his face red with anger. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Andrea as she rose from her seat to respond. With quiet composure, Andrea addressed the man directly, her voice steady but firm. "I understand your concerns," she said, "but I want you to think about something. When you call 911, do you care about the color of the officer's skin or whether they're male or female? Or do you simply want someone who will protect you and treat you fairly?" Her words struck a chord, prompting murmurs of agreement from some attendees. Still others remained unconvinced, shaking their heads dismissively. Andrea knew that winning over everyone wasn't possible, nor was it her goal. What mattered most was creating policies that prioritized justice and equality, even if they weren't universally popular. She ended the meeting by reiterating her commitment to transparency and inviting anyone with constructive feedback to join her in shaping the future of the department. Meanwhile, Andrea continued to push for systemic changes that would have a lasting impact. She introduced body cameras for all officers, ensuring accountability and providing evidence in cases of misconduct. She also established a hotline where residents could report complaints or commendations anonymously, giving a voice to those who might otherwise remain silent. These measures faced criticism from some quarters, with detractors claiming they infringed on officers' rights. But Andrea countered by emphasizing the importance of trust between law enforcement and the community. "If we truly serve and protect," she told her team during a briefing, "then we must be willing to hold ourselves to the highest standards." Outside the police department, grassroots movements gained traction, driven by passionate activists determined to keep the conversation alive. High school students organized marches, carrying signs with messages like, "Justice starts here," and "Our voices matter." Local artists painted murals celebrating diversity, transforming blank walls into vibrant canvases that reflected the town's evolving identity. Even businesses joined the effort, hosting fundraisers and donating proceeds to organizations focused on racial equity. The collective energy was palpable, a testament to the power of unity in the face of adversity. Andrea attended many of these events, standing alongside community members and lending her support. Her presence served as a reminder that leadership wasn't about dictating solutions but about walking alongside others in pursuit of common goals. Amidst all the progress, there were moments of vulnerability that reminded everyone how fragile change could be. One such moment occurred when a young black teenager named Jamal was stopped by an officer late at night for no apparent reason other than walking through a predominantly white neighborhood. Jamal, who had recently moved to the town with his family, felt humiliated and angry after the encounter. His parents reached out to Andrea, demanding answers and action. Andrea listened intently, her heart heavy with disappointment, but also resolve. She assured them that the matter would be investigated thoroughly and promised to meet with Jamal personally to discuss his experience. During their meeting, she apologized sincerely, acknowledging the pain caused by the incident. "We're working hard to make things better," she told him, "but I know it's not enough. You deserve to feel safe in your own town, and I won't stop until that happens." The fallout from Jamal's case reignited debates about racial profiling and implicit bias, forcing the department to confront uncomfortable truths. Andrea called for an emergency review of all recent stops, analyzing patterns and identifying areas for improvement. She also implemented additional training modules focused specifically on recognizing and addressing unconscious prejudices. These steps helped restore some measure of confidence, though Andrea knew the journey was far from over. Every setback was a reminder that progress required constant vigilance and unwavering determination. Through it all, Andrea leaned on her own inner strength, drawing inspiration from the people around her. She found solace in conversations with colleagues like Lisa, who shared her passion for reform, and took comfort in the unwavering support of her family. Her husband, Mark, often reminded her to take breaks and recharge, knowing how much weight she carried on her shoulders. Their teenage daughter, Mia, too, played a role in keeping Andrea grounded. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Mia asked, "Mom, do you think you'll ever fix everything?" Andrea smiled softly, pulling her close. "Probably not," she admitted. "But every small step counts, and if we keep moving forward, even slowly, we'll get closer to where we need to be." Her words encapsulated the essence of her journey, a relentless pursuit of justice tempered by the understanding that perfection was unattainable. Yet, in striving for it, she inspired countless others to join her cause. The town, once fractured by fear and prejudice, began to heal piece by piece. Conversations became less guarded, Friendships crossed cultural divides, and acts of kindness replaced acts of hostility. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Scars remained and wounds still needed time to fully mend. But for the first time in a long while, hope outweighed despair. And as Andrea looked out at the changing landscape of her town, she allowed herself to believe that brighter days truly lay ahead, not because the battle was won, but because the fight itself brought people together. As the town continued to evolve, Andrea's leadership became a beacon of hope for many, though not without its challenges. Her unwavering commitment to reform had sparked meaningful change, but it also attracted scrutiny from those who opposed her vision. Critics argued that her policies were too lenient on offenders and undermined the authority of law enforcement. Some even went so far as to suggest she was more concerned with appeasing activists than maintaining order. These accusations weighed heavily on Andrea, but she refused to let them deter her. Instead, she channeled her energy into proving that justice and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. She believed deeply that true safety came not from fear but from trust, and building that trust required consistent effort. One day, Andrea received an unexpected visit from a woman named Ruth Harper, a longtime resident of the town who had lived there for over 50 years. Ruth was known for her sharp tongue and traditional views, often voicing skepticism about modern changes. Yet when she walked into Andrea's office, her demeanor was unusually subdued. "Chief Hayes," Ruth began hesitantly, "I need to talk to you about something." Andrea gestured for her to sit, sensing that this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. After a long pause, Ruth explained that her grandson, Daniel, had recently been arrested for vandalism. While Ruth didn't condone his actions, she felt the punishment he faced. Community service and mandatory counseling was fair and appropriate. What surprised her, however, was how the officers involved handled the situation. They treated Daniel with respect, explaining the consequences of his behavior without resorting to intimidation or hostility. For Ruth, this marked a stark contrast to how things used to be done, and it made her question some of her own long-held beliefs. Andrea listened intently, nodding as Ruth spoke. When the older woman finished, Andrea thanked her for sharing her thoughts. "Change can be uncomfortable," Andrea said gently, "but it's necessary if we want to create a better future for everyone." Ruth nodded slowly, admitting that while she still had reservations about certain reforms, she could see their value. Their conversation ended on a positive note, with Ruth promising to keep an open mind moving forward. It was a small victory, but one that reminded Andrea of the importance of patience and persistence. Every person reached, every heart changed, brought the town one step closer to healing. Meanwhile, Andrea's focus shifted toward addressing another pressing issue: economic inequality. While racial tensions had dominated much of the discourse, poverty remained a significant barrier to progress. Many residents struggled to make ends meet, particularly in neighborhoods historically underserved by local government. Crime rates in these areas were disproportionately high, creating a cycle of disadvantage that seemed impossible to break. Andrea recognized that policing alone couldn't solve these problems. Systemic issues required systemic solutions. She partnered with local organizations, businesses, and schools to launch initiatives aimed at providing resources and opportunities to marginalized communities. Job training programs, affordable housing projects, and mentorship networks began to take shape, offering hope to families who had long felt forgotten. These efforts didn't go unnoticed. One beneficiary of the job training program was a single mother named Maria Gonzalez, who had been working multiple low-paying jobs to support her 3 children. Through the program, Maria gained skills in bookkeeping and secured a stable position at a nearby accounting firm. Grateful for the opportunity, she wrote a heartfelt letter to Andrea, thanking her for believing in people like her. "Before this program, I felt invisible," Maria wrote. "Now I feel like I have a chance to build a better life for my kids. Thank you for seeing us and fighting for us." Reading Maria's words filled Andrea with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that stories like Maria's were just the beginning, that real change would take years, maybe decades, but each success story fueled her determination to keep pushing forward. Despite the progress, Andrea faced moments of doubt. Late nights in her office became more frequent as she grappled with the enormity of the task ahead. The weight of responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming, especially when setbacks occurred. One such setback happened when a young officer, eager to prove himself, mishandled a routine traffic stop, escalating the situation unnecessarily. The incident drew criticism from both the community and within the department, reigniting debates about whether reforms were effective. Andrea called the officer into her office, not to berate him but to understand what had gone wrong. During their conversation, she realized that while training programs were essential, they couldn't replace experience and mentorship. She decided to pair inexperienced officers with seasoned mentors, ensuring they had guidance during critical moments. This decision led to the creation of a formal mentoring program, which quickly gained popularity among officers. Experienced veterans like Ryan Miller, who had initially resisted change, found themselves taking younger colleagues under their wing. Ryan, in particular, developed a close relationship with a rookie named Sarah Chen, whose idealism reminded him of his younger self. Together, they navigated challenging situations, learning from each other along the way. Sarah's fresh perspective helped Ryan see the value in empathy and communication, while Ryan's wisdom taught Sarah the importance of staying grounded in difficult circumstances. Their partnership exemplified the kind of collaboration Andrea had envisioned, a blending of old and new approaches to create something stronger. Outside the police department, the town continued to embrace its evolving identity. Art festivals celebrating diverse cultures became annual traditions, drawing visitors from neighboring cities. Schools incorporated lessons on inclusivity and social justice into their curriculums, preparing students to become compassionate leaders. Even local media played a role, highlighting stories of resilience and unity rather than focusing solely on conflict. These shifts created a sense of pride among residents, fostering a spirit of belonging that transcended differences. Andrea attended many of these events, marveling at how far the town had come since the day she first confronted Greg Thompson. Each celebration reinforced her belief that change was possible, no matter how daunting the obstacles might seem. Yet, Andrea knew that complacency was the enemy of progress. Just as things seemed to stabilize, a national incident involving police brutality reignited tensions across the country, and the town was no exception. Protests erupted once again, with the demonstrators calling for greater accountability and transparency in law enforcement. Andrea joined the protests, standing shoulder to shoulder with residents as they marched through the streets. Her presence sent a powerful message. She wasn't just an authority figure but a partner in the fight for justice. At one rally, she took the microphone, her voice steady yet impassioned. "We've made strides," she told the crowd, "but our work is far from over. We must continue to hold ourselves accountable, to listen and to grow. Together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe and valued." Her speech resonated deeply, earning cheers and applause from the audience. But Andrea knew that words alone weren't enough. In the weeks that followed, she doubled down on her efforts, introducing stricter oversight measures and expanding community outreach programs. She also encouraged officers to engage in open dialogues with residents, listening to their concerns and working collaboratively to find solutions. These conversations weren't always easy, but they were vital. They reminded everyone that despite their differences, they shared a common goal: a safer, fairer, and more inclusive town. As time passed, Andrea's tireless dedication began to leave a lasting legacy. Younger officers looked up to her as a role model, aspiring to lead with integrity and compassion. Community members, too, saw her as a symbol of hope, someone who refused to give up even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Her influence extended beyond the town itself, inspiring neighboring communities to adopt similar reforms. Journalists wrote articles praising her approach, academics studied her methods, and activists cited her as proof that meaningful change was achievable. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt within Andrea herself. Leading the charge for power, reform had tested her in ways she never imagined, forcing her to confront her own fears and vulnerabilities. There were days when she questioned whether she was doing enough, whether she was truly making a difference. Yet through it all, she discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed, a resilience born not from arrogance but from humility. She learned to lean on others, to accept help when needed, and to celebrate victories no matter how small. Most importantly, she realized that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking the right questions and empowering others to find solutions. One evening, as Andrea stood on the steps of the police station watching the sunset, she reflected on the journey thus far. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also been rewarding in ways she couldn't have anticipated. She thought about the lives touched, the hearts changed, and the bonds forged in the pursuit of justice. And as she gazed out at the town bathed in go. As the years rolled on, Andrea's legacy began to take root in ways that extended far beyond the town she served. Her story, once a local tale of courage and reform, gained national attention as journalists, researchers, and policymakers took notice of the transformative changes happening under her leadership. Documentaries were made, books were written, and conferences invited her to speak about the lessons learned during her tenure. While some praised her as a trailblazer, others scrutinized her methods, questioning whether her approach could be replicated elsewhere. Andrea welcomed both perspectives, knowing that critique was essential for growth. She often reminded audiences that her journey wasn't perfect. It was messy, imperfect, and filled with moments of doubt. But it was proof that progress was possible when people came together with shared purpose. One of the most significant milestones occurred when the town hosted its first-ever Unity Summit, an event designed to bring together leaders from across the country to discuss strategies for addressing systemic inequality. The summit attracted mayors, police chiefs, activists, educators, and community organizers, all eager to learn from Andrea's experiences. Over 3 days, participants engaged in workshops, panel discussions, and collaborative brainstorming sessions aimed at fostering dialogue and innovation. Andrea delivered the keynote address, sharing not just her successes but also her failures. "We didn't get everything right," she admitted candidly, "but we kept trying. And every time we fell short, we listened, adapted, and tried again." Her honesty resonated deeply, earning her standing ovations and sparking meaningful conversations that continued long after the event ended. The Unity Summit marked a turning point not only for the town but for Andrea personally. It affirmed that her work had ripple effects reaching far beyond what she could have imagined. Yet it also reminded her that true change required collective effort. No single person, not even someone in her position, could shoulder the burden alone. This realization led her to focus more intently on empowering others to lead. She mentored young officers like Sarah Chen, encouraging them to pursue leadership roles within the department. She supported grassroots initiatives led by residents, ensuring they had access to resources and platforms to amplify their voices. And she worked tirelessly to dismantle barriers that prevented marginalized groups from participating fully in civic life. Her goal was simple yet profound: to create a world where everyone had the opportunity to shape their own destiny. Despite her growing influence, Andrea remained grounded in the everyday realities of the town. She continued to walk through neighborhoods, stopping to chat with shopkeepers, parents, and children. These interactions kept her connected to the people she served, reminding her why she had chosen this path in the first place. One afternoon, while visiting a park where families often gathered, she noticed Jamal, the teenager who had been unfairly stopped by an officer years earlier, playing basketball with friends. He spotted her and waved, jogging over to say hello. "Hey, Chief Hayes," he said with a grin. "Remember me?" Andrea smiled warmly, recalling their previous conversation. "Of course I remember you, Jamal. How have you been?" Jamal nodded, thoughtfully. "I'm good. Actually, I wanted to thank you for everything. That night you talked to me, it meant a lot. Made me realize I could still make something of myself, even if things don't always go my way." He explained that he was now volunteering as a mentor for younger kids in the neighborhood, helping them navigate challenges similar to those he'd faced. Andrea felt a swell of pride hearing his words. Here was living proof that compassion and accountability could transform lives. not just for individuals, but for entire communities. She patted him on the shoulder, encouraging him to keep going. "You're making a difference, Jamal. Keep shining." Moments like these reinforced Andrea's belief in the power of connection. Change didn't happen overnight, nor did it occur in isolation. It happened when people chose to see each other as human beings, flaws and all, and work together toward common goals. This philosophy guided her as she prepared to step down from her role as police chief. After nearly a decade of service, she decided it was time to pass the torch to the next generation of leaders. Her decision wasn't easy. The thought of leaving behind the work she loved weighed heavily on her heart. But she knew that staying too long risked stagnation. Leadership, she believed, was about creating space for others to grow and thrive. Her successor was none other than Lisa Carter, the detective who had once partnered with Ryan Miller during team-building exercises. Lisa had risen through the ranks, quickly, earning respect for her innovative ideas and unwavering commitment to justice. When Andrea announced her retirement, Lisa expressed gratitude for the opportunity, but also humility about the responsibility ahead. "I wouldn't be here without you," Lisa told Andrea during a private meeting. "Everything I've learned because of your example." Andrea smiled, brushing aside the compliment. "Don't give me too much credit," she joked. "Just promise me you'll keep pushing boundaries and don't let anyone tell you something can't be done." On her final day as chief, Andrea addressed the department one last time. Standing before a room full of officers, she reflected on the journey they had shared. "When I started, I didn't know if any of this would work," she confessed. "But you proved me wrong. You showed me that change is possible when we choose to believe in each other. So, as I step aside, I ask you to carry that belief forward, to keep listening, learning, and growing." Her voice cracked slightly as she added, "Thank you for trusting me even when I doubted myself, and thank you for being brave enough to embrace change." After the ceremony, Andrea walked out of the precinct for the last time, greeted by a crowd of colleagues, friends, and community members who had gathered to celebrate her contributions. There were speeches, laughter, and tears as people shared memories of how she had touched their lives. Among the crowd was Greg Thompson, the officer whose confrontation with her had sparked so much transformation. He approached her hesitantly, holding out a folded piece of paper. "Chief Hayes," he said softly, "this is for you." Andrea unfolded the note to find a heartfelt message thanking her for believing in him when no one else did. She looked up, meeting his gaze with a smile. "Thank you for proving me right, Greg." In the months that followed, Andrea settled into a quieter life, though her passion for justice never waned. She joined a nonprofit organization focused on criminal justice reform, traveling to different cities to share her insights and advocate for policy changes. She also spent more time with her family, cherishing moments with Mark and Mia that had often been sacrificed during her demanding career. Though retired, she remained a guiding presence in the town, offering advice to Lisa whenever needed and attending community events as a proud citizen. Her name became synonymous with resilience and hope, inspiring countless others to follow in her footsteps. Meanwhile, the town continued to flourish under Lisa's leadership. Building on Andrea's foundation, Lisa introduced new programs aimed at addressing emerging challenges, such as mental health crises and climate-related emergencies. Officers received specialized training to handle nonviolent situations with empathy and care, further strengthening ties with the community. Residents, too, embraced their role as active participants in shaping the town's future. Neighborhood watch groups expanded, cultural festivals grew larger, and volunteerism reached record levels. The spirit of collaboration that Andrea had nurtured blossomed into a culture of mutual support and accountability. Years later, when historians looked back on the town's transformation, they credited Andrea Hayes as the catalyst for change. But Andrea herself preferred to see it differently. To her, the real heroes were the ordinary people who had dared to dream of a better world, and then worked tirelessly to make it a reality. Whether it was Jamal mentoring kids, Ruth challenging her own biases, or Greg confronting his prejudices, each individual had played a part in rewriting the town's story. Andrea's gift was simply giving them the tools and encouragement to do so. As she sat on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Andrea allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The road had been long and arduous, filled with triumphs and setbacks alike. But looking around at the vibrant, diverse, and united town she had helped build, she felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. They hadn't achieved perfection, far from it, but they had created something extraordinary, a community bound not by fear or division, but by trust, respect, and love. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Andrea whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey, for the people, and for the endless possibilities that lay ahead.